Welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Senate race down in the state of Florida, with the race between the two leading candidates, Republican incumbent Marco Rubio and Democrat Representative Val Demings, heating up already, over a year out from Election Day. We'll be taking a look at that story today, June 29th, 2021. From Anchor by Spotify, this is the Ishan S. Show, a podcast about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics from the perspective of a 15-year-old. With me, your host, Ishan. Welcome back to the Ishan S. Show. Thank you for joining us again. Let's get right into today's topic. So today, I'm going to be talking about the Senate race down in Florida. Some quick background about the race. Incumbent Republican Senator Marco Rubio is up for re-election to a third term to represent his home state and is the nearly undisputed Republican nominee. On the Democrat side, while they will have a primary on a date to be decided, probably next year, Representative Val Demings of the 10th District is seeming to emerge as a frontrunner in the primary race, and I expect her to be the Democratic nominee. Okay, so first, I want to explain to you guys a little bit about politics in the state of Florida. So for our friends who don't know, Florida is the most notorious swing state in modern American history, in my view. Now, what a swing state is, real quick, is a state that fluctuates back and forth in electoral politics between the Democrats and the Republicans. And it gets really annoying trying to figure out where it's going to go one year or the next. Now, with a few exceptions in the last few years, or rather including last year, Florida has consistently voted with the winner of every presidential election for decades now, whether it be Democrat or Republican. Think back to the year 2000 when George Bush was up against Al Gore. That election, he won, I think it was 537 votes in the state of Florida, and that decided the presidency. Donald Trump only made it where he was thanks to that win in Florida. If it wasn't for the Florida win, things may have looked a little gloomy for him in 2016. So Florida is really important. Now, with that being said, despite its swing state-like nature, statewide office has been shifting towards Republicans for the past few years now, with a few victories from Democrats every now and then. With this increased trend towards the Republican Party, Democrats have started to lose a little hope about their futures in Florida, and maybe they have a fair reason to think this way. Since Barack Obama was elected, since he won the state to a second term over 8 years ago, the state of Florida has elected a Republican in both presidential elections, including last year's, with increased margins in 2020. They have since elected or re-elected Republicans to represent them in the U.S. Senate, and overall House delegation is a Republican majority. It is clear that Florida is trending towards being a Republican state, but personally, I feel it's not yet time for Democrats to call quits on the state altogether. While yes, things do look a little gloomy for them, Florida has shown some support for Democrats since then, including stronger candidates and narrow-ish margins in some elections are things to look forward to. Now, while I don't have much to say for Democrats in Florida, I can say this. As long as a Democrat can be elected to represent the state of West Virginia or a Republican from Maine, then a Democrat most certainly has the shot at winning and maybe even winning big in Florida. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's take a look at who's running to be the next U.S. Senator from Florida. Marco Rubio is a name that's very familiar in Florida politics and definitely in national politics. He was elected to his job back in 2010, beating his Democratic rival by a ratio of 2-1. Now, all right, to the Democratic candidate, Kendrick Meek's credit, there was a lot of vote splitting in that election due to a Republican-turned-independent Charlie Crist running for Senate. He's actually running for governor this year. While he had hopes of taking votes away from both candidates, Crist instead took a lot from the Democratic candidate, leaving Meek and himself, Crist, with each less than 30% of the vote. And this allowed Rubio to sail to victory. During his first term, Rubio was a fierce critic of the Obama administration, but was also very bipartisan in his work. Right before the end of his first term in April of 2015, Rubio announced his candidacy for president. And I know that his presidential campaign is where most people in the United States know him from. He performed quite well, entering the sphere of top-tier candidates, joining others like Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, and of course, Donald Trump. He was a strong candidate and performed decently, coming in second place in the races he participated in. Not all of them, but many of them he came in second place behind Donald Trump. The two clashed as frontrunners, and Rubio was receiving a lot of support for this, especially after Jeb Bush dropped out of the race. But soon it started to show that Rubio was also a weak candidate for president himself, at least compared to Donald Trump. Following a poor showing in the Florida primary, his home state's primary, he quickly suspended his campaign and threw his support behind Trump. After that whole ordeal, he decided to run for re-election, and he won in Florida with an 8% margin, receiving 52% of the vote. After that, Rubio worked to remain in Donald Trump's good books and was a Trump ally for most of the term, but disagreed with him from time to time. Rubio is now running for a third term without any other office in mind for the time being. Hint, hint, president or vice president. While Democrats have not yet elected a nominee to represent them in the 2022 general election, Demings is the most high-profile candidate on their list. She currently represents the 10th District of Florida, which comprises of much of the Orlando area. And before that, she served in the Orlando Police Department for 27 years, rising up in the ranks to become the department's first female police chief. She was elected to her current job in the House back in 2016 and has since then seen her national prominence go up drastically. Following the first impeachment of former President Donald Trump, Speaker Nancy Pelosi selected Demings to be one of the impeachment managers in his Senate trial. You can think of an impeachment manager as a prosecutor in this situation. She was the only non-lawyer on the team, and that was when most people really took notice of her, including myself. While Trump was acquitted, she still remained as a vocal critic of the Trump administration and its handling of the various crises of 2020, including COVID-19, racism, and police brutality. Now, the second point where she rose in prominence and fame was when it was reported that she was being closely considered to be Joe Biden's running mate. In May of last year, she even confirmed that she was on the, quote, short list and said that if she were offered the job, then she would definitely accept it. During the process, she faced a little criticism for her time as Orlando's top cop, but still remained in the running. We all know that Vice President Harris was selected in the end, but Val Demings still stayed in national politics and was floated as a potential candidate for Secretary of Homeland Security. I think one goal of the Biden campaign was to boost the profiles of all the people that they were considering and provide more chances for them in electoral politics in the future. And I think this worked well with Val Demings because if it wasn't for the VP vetting process that she was involved in, most of us wouldn't have known her, and she probably wouldn't even be running today. So that's a look at the top candidates in this race. When we come back, we're going to take a look at where this race stands and who has the better chance at winning. Stick with us. We'll be right back after this short break. All right, so we're back from the break, and now that we know our candidates, let's take a look at this race. As I said, Florida is a swing state, but increasingly trending towards becoming a Republican stronghold. And I already talked about the prospects of Democrats in this state. Now, with this upcoming election, there are a few factors that are going to impact the state a lot. First, the first factor is factor of the incumbency. Regardless of whatever election you're looking at, you must always give the starting points to the incumbent who currently holds the position and then give or take whatever, or depending on whatever it is. In this case, Marco Rubio. It's pretty well known that incumbents just simply perform better than challengers on a wider scale, irrespective of party. Now, why is that? Well, incumbents generally have more contacts, more relations, more experience with the office. So they know how to steer a campaign in a manner that caters to the interests and needs of their constituents and voters, while an outsider or a challenger just doesn't have those resources right off the bat. Of course, unless they have previously held that position, but that's not what we're talking about today. The second factor is fundraising, especially in a large swing state like Florida. It can have a huge impact. While not necessarily applicable for a Senate seat, I think there was a statistic out there that said that 90% of all House races within the last few years, all those races as winning candidates had more funding than their opponent. Money is crucial for campaigns, for things like ads, paying staff, and anything else, because as they say, money can buy you most things when you need it. Fundraising is also a metric used to measure a candidate's success. If you were paying attention to the 2020 presidential elections, not the general, but the Democratic primary, fundraising was used as a means to determine a candidate's standing in the polls, to match it. Like if this candidate had a lot of fundraising, but they were really down in the polls, you could kind of match things up and try to find a better spot for them in the race. Now, one day a candidate can do something and they can see a 60% increase in donation value, or they can do something really stupid and by the end of the next quarter, their war chest becomes empty. In terms of fundraising, the money raised in a general election for a statewide office will be a very important factor in providing support for either candidate. And for a challenger, this is the first line of attack a challenger can use against an incumbent, like AOC did in her district when she was measuring number of donations from people and the amount she just raised without, corporate stuff. It was a metric that she used. Not all candidates generally use it, but, fundraising, again, for challengers can be that kind of Hail Mary to try to show that where the incumbent is weak. And then the third and final factor that I'll be talking about is polling and previous data. Now, I know that opinion polling is simply never been the best piece of info to base a prediction off of. I do think that it can at least be used as a starting point to understand the position of an electorate and try to base off predictions from that using more data. Sometimes polls are grossly off, like they were in 2016, or they can be somewhat accurate and perhaps even hint at a mind blower but get ignored, like Joe Biden in Georgia last year. Regardless of what state, election, or candidate you're looking at, these three factors are what I usually look at and what most other pundits also look straight at when trying to determine the position and status of an anticipated close election like this one. In the first factor, the factor of the incumbency, Marco Rubio has the edge. He's been elected to his job in the Senate 2 times already and has garnered a lot of national attention. I think most people recognize Rubio in his home state from, of course, being their senator, but also from his presidential campaign. It's a good thing in a campaign to tell people that you've been tested with the job and have successfully represented them for over a decade. Now, successfully can be debatable, but he will definitely say that he's represented Florida successfully. And the time cannot be arguable. It's been over a decade. So that give the chips to Rubio in this case. And that and his support from Trump, at least I'm assuming he'll get that support in a state that voted for Trump both times around, does show a more hopeful election campaign for Rubio in that aspect. As for Demings, she is a challenger, and whether people like to hear it or not, challengers, Republican or Democrat, simply have the odds stacked against them, on their first day at least. That doesn't mean that she isn't capable of winning, however. Demings, unlike her predecessor challengers and rivals to Rubio, has name recognition, super valuable. With name recognition from the VP vetting process and the impeachment trial, Demings put herself out there as a viable opponent, enough for Marco Rubio to even anticipate a run from her. On the same day she announced her campaign, Rubio released a pre-recorded video on his social medias trying to make a case for himself against Demings, in that he, criticized her stance on things and called her a radical liberal and everything. It was a pre-recorded video. I think he was definitely anticipating a Demings run. So you can maybe take that as him responding to a threat. For fundraising, I'll say this. It's too early to tell. Generally, because these numbers are released on a quarterly basis and aren't as visible until later into the campaign. So I don't have much to say on that front, other than just the numbers that have been provided to us from, public disclosures and stuff. So from these numbers specifically, as of December 31st of last year, Rubio's campaign had $3 million cash on hand, while the Demings camp had $770K on hand. While these numbers also give Rubio the upper hand, it was reported that within the first 24 hours of her announcement, Representative Demings managed to raise $1 million. That's quite impressive to raise for your first 24 hours, and I think those numbers were quite deliberate too. What I mean by that is that Demings said that she would probably be running for higher office, but never clarified whether it was governor or Senate. So many people were waiting for that announcement, and that built her a lot of anticipation. After she made it official that she was running for Senate, I think people just jumped right in to support her using the money that they had. But those numbers that we have at the moment are super easy numbers. They're just super easy numbers to ignore. We'll definitely be seeing more money get poured into this race and spent over the next 17 or 16 months. Actually, as a matter of fact, one firm said that this race might be the most expensive Senate election in U.S. history. So that's something to look forward to, right? And then there was polling. Virtually everyone in politics has a lot of resentment, yet also respect for opinion polling. Because like I said, they can be horridly inaccurate, or they can carry numbers that seem wacky but end up being terrifyingly accurate. Yet every time we come back to them to see where our elections stand. I know I do. And I have no idea why I do that, but there's just something in polling that brings people back. Now, I'll say that polling has gotten better over time and can be considered a little more reliable in some instances, but not all the time. I do not anticipate going purely off of polling data in any election that I cover, but I will definitely use it as a reference point. So like fundraising, we are very early into the race, so it shouldn't be too disappointing that we barely have any data. I looked around and there was one poll that was on 538. That poll had Rubio beating Demings with a 21-point margin. So in that, Rubio had 60% and Demings had 40%. Now, I have a hard time trying to figure out the accuracy of the poll because some pollsters do, stray a little to the left or the right and sometimes have their biases. I don't know much about this pollster, the political matrix, and the listener group. On 538, it wasn't listed any higher than a B- rating polling firm when I was using the grading filter. So I do question the accuracy of this poll, just because 21%, while possible, is highly unlikely of a margin with the proof of support amongst both candidates. Now, like I said, with the fundraising numbers, polling data will come in the future, and we'll find out more about where this supposedly stands with more reliable and reputable posters. So look, a common theme for this episode is that it's very early. I just wanted to introduce you to the prospective candidates and know where things are. While barely any data is important, or is available, it is important to remember that we are literally 20 days into this race. Demings announced her candidacy 20 days ago. There's a lot of time left for polling data, for fundraising, inevitable scandals, debates, and whatnot ahead of us. I'll update you on this election from time to time, and we'll learn more about where things are headed. That does it for us here today. If you like this episode and want to learn more about this election and other 2022 races, then follow us on Instagram and Twitter at The Sean S. Show for breaking political news posts and updates about the show. Share this episode with your friends and family and help grow this podcast. Thank you for all your support. I'll see you on Friday. Bye.